In the year 451 CE, the fate of Roman Gaul hung by a thread. From the east came Attila the Hun, ruler of a vast steppe empire, commander of warriors from many peoples, and a name that struck fear across both halves of the Roman world. Cities burned, refugees fled, the old Roman order trembled. But on the plains of northern Gaul, Attila met an enemy unlike any he had faced before. Not a single empire, not one kingdom, but a desperate coalition of Romans, Visigoths, Alans, Franks, Burgundians, and others, all gathered under the shadow of collapse.
This was the Battle of Châlons, also known as the Battle of the Catalaunian Fields. It was not simply Rome against the barbarians, it was coalition against coalition, and it became one of the bloodiest, most mysterious, and most debated battles of late antiquity.
By the middle of the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire still existed. It still had emperors, it still had laws, it still had cities, bishops, senators, taxes, and armies. But the empire was no longer the mighty machine it had once been. The Roman West had been weakened by civil wars, invasions, economic decline, and political instability. Power no longer rested only in the hands of emperors. It belonged increasingly to generals, warlords, and powerful military brokers.
One of the most important of these men was Flavius Aetius. Aetius was the most powerful general in the Western Roman Empire. He had spent part of his youth among the Huns as a hostage, and he understood their world better than most Roman leaders. He knew their speed, their diplomacy, their brutality, and their methods of war. But Aetius also knew something else. Rome could no longer defeat a great enemy alone. The old legions of the classical empire were gone. The Western Roman army depended heavily on alliances with peoples who had once been Rome's enemies: Visigoths, Franks, Burgundians, Alans, and others.
This was the reality of the late Roman world. The empire survived not by controlling everything directly, but by negotiating, bribing, threatening, and persuading powerful groups to fight on its behalf. And in 451, that system would be tested by the most feared ruler in Europe. Attila was not simply a raider. He was not merely the leader of a wild horde sweeping blindly across Europe. By 451, Attila ruled a powerful Hunnic empire stretching across Central and Eastern Europe. His power came not only from Hunnic horsemen, but from a massive network of subject peoples and allied kings: Gepids, Ostrogoths, Rugians, Siri, Thuringians, Alans. Many warriors fought under Attila's command not because they were all Huns, but because Attila had built a political machine of tribute, fear, reward, and domination. He could threaten the Eastern Roman Empire. He could extract gold from Constantinople. He could negotiate with emperors. He could play Roman rivals against one another. And in 451, he turned west. Why? The causes were complicated. One story involved Honoria, the sister of the Western Roman Emperor Valentinian III. She had sent Attila a message and a ring, perhaps asking for help in escaping an unwanted marriage. Attila treated this as a marriage proposal and demanded half the Western Empire as her dowry.
But that was only one excuse. There were also conflicts over tribute, pressure from the Vandals in North Africa, rivalries with the Visigoths, and Attila's own desire for prestige, wealth, and strategic advantage. Attila was not moving randomly. He was making a calculated strike into Gaul, and Gaul was vulnerable.
In the spring of 451, Attila crossed the Rhine and entered Gaul. The invasion was devastating. Metz was sacked. Towns across northeastern Gaul were threatened or destroyed.
The shock of the Hunnic advance spread quickly. To many people living in Gaul, it must have felt like the end of the world. Attila's army moved deep into Roman territory, toward the city of Orleans, known in antiquity as Aurelianum. Orleans was critical. If Attila captured it, he could push deeper into Gaul, threaten the Visigothic kingdom of Aquitaine, and possibly break the Roman federate balance that still held the region together.
Attila understood the danger, but he did not have enough troops by himself, so he began assembling a coalition. Romans came, Franks came, Burgundians came, Armoricans came, Alans came, but the most important allies were the Visigoths. Their king, Theodoric I, ruled from Toulouse. The Visigoths had a complicated relationship with Rome. They had once fought against the empire. They had settled inside imperial territory. They were Roman allies, but also independent and ambitious. Theodoric had no reason to die for Rome, but he had every reason to stop Attila. If the Huns crushed Gaul, the Visigoths would be next. And so, after diplomacy and pressure, Theodoric joined Attila. Rome and the Visigoths would fight together, not because they trusted each other completely, but because Attila was too dangerous to face separately.
This is what makes the Battle of Châlons so important. It was not a clean battle between civilization and barbarism. That is the old myth. The reality was far more interesting. On one side stood Attilius, the Roman general, leading a coalition of Romans and federate allies. Beside him stood Theodoric and the Visigoths. There were also Alans, Franks, Burgundians, and others. On the opposite side stood Attila, ruler of the Huns, but his army was also a coalition. Huns in the center, supported by subject peoples and allied Germanic groups, including Gepids and Ostrogoths.
Both armies represented the new world of the 5th century. The Roman Empire was no longer fighting with purely Roman armies. The Hunnic Empire was not fighting with Huns alone. This was coalition warfare. And somewhere in the Champagne region of modern France, these two unstable military systems collided. The exact battlefield is still debated. The battle is often called the Battle of Châlons, after Châlons en Champagne, but ancient sources also refer to the Catalonian fields, or the Campus Moriacus. Some traditions place the battle closer to Troy's.
Modern historians generally avoid being too precise. The safest answer is that the battle happened somewhere in the broad Champagne corridor between Châlons and Troy. A battlefield of plains, ridges, and open ground, perfect terrain for cavalry, and deadly ground for the armies about to meet. Our fullest account of the battle comes from Jordanus, a historian writing about a century later. Jordanus must be used carefully. He wrote long after the battle, and his account may contain Gothic traditions, political messages, and dramatic exaggerations. But without him, we would know far less. According to Jordanus, the battle centered on a ridge or rise in the landscape. Both armies recognized its importance. Whoever controlled the high ground would gain a major advantage. Aetius and the Visigothic prince Thorismund moved quickly and seized the height before Attila's forces could fully take it. This mattered.
The Huns were famous for mobility, archery, and rapid maneuver. High ground could disrupt their movements and give the Roman Visigothic coalition a stronger defensive position. The coalition line was arranged carefully. Aetius and the Romans held one side. The Visigoths, under King Theodoric, held the other. In the center were the Alans, under their leader Sangiban. Jordanes claims the Alans were placed in the middle because Aetius and Theodoric distrusted them and feared they might betray the coalition. Maybe that is true. But it may also be a later interpretation. The Alans were skilled cavalrymen, and placing them in the center may have made tactical sense.
Across the field, Attila placed himself and the Huns in the center. His subject peoples and allied kings formed the wings. The armies faced each other. Romans, Goths, Huns, Alans, Franks, Burgundians, Gepids, Ostrogoths. Warriors from across the late antique world. And then the battle began.
The Battle of Châlons was likely brutal, confusing, and chaotic. This was not a neat clash of two disciplined lines. It was a massive collision of different peoples, fighting styles, languages, loyalties, and commanders. Hunnic horse archers would have tried to weaken the enemy with missile fire, using speed and distance to create disorder. The Roman and Federate forces had to hold together. The Visigoths fought fiercely on the right. The Alans in the center absorbed enormous pressure. The Romans under Aetius had to keep the coalition from breaking apart. In a battle like this, command was difficult. Dust, noise, and confusion would have made it hard to know what was happening even a short distance away. At some point, the fighting grew especially intense around the Visigothic wing. King Theodoric I, the Visigothic ruler who had joined Aetius against Attila, was killed. The exact circumstances are unclear. Some accounts suggest he was thrown from his horse and trampled. Others connect his death to the chaos of the fighting. But his death could have shattered the Visigoths. Instead, it enraged them. Theodoric's son, Thorismund, continued the fight. The Visigoths pressed hard against Attila's forces. The battle turned into a bloodbath.
Ancient sources give enormous casualty figures. 165,000 dead, even 300,000 dead. Modern historians do not accept those numbers literally. They are almost certainly exaggerated. But the exaggeration itself tells us something. To ancient writers, this battle was remembered as horrifyingly bloody, a struggle so violent that later generations could hardly describe it without using impossible numbers. As the fighting dragged on, Attila's position worsened. The coalition had gained the high ground. The Visigoths were still fighting, despite the death of their king. The Hunnic advance had stalled. Eventually, Attila withdrew into his wagon camp. The wagon laager was a defensive formation made from wagons, creating a kind of mobile fortress. For steppe armies, this could provide protection in moments of danger. According to Jordanes, Attila prepared for the possibility of total defeat. He supposedly ordered a funeral pyre to be built from saddles so that if the enemy broke into the camp, he could burn himself rather than be captured.
Whether this detail is literally true is impossible to know. It may be dramatic storytelling, but it captures the image of Attila at his most vulnerable. The man who had terrified Europe was now surrounded, defensive, and uncertain. Night fell, and in the darkness, the battlefield became even more confused. Thorismund, the son of Theodoric, reportedly became separated and accidentally wandered near the Hunnic camp before escaping.
Aetius, too, may have become disoriented in the chaos. The next day, the Roman-Visigothic coalition faced a decision. Should they storm Attila's wagon camp and destroy him completely? They did not, and that decision has fascinated historians ever since.
Why did Aetius not finish Attila? Jordanes gives one famous explanation. He claims Aetius advised Thorismund to return quickly to Toulouse to secure the Visigothic throne after his father's death. On the surface, this sounds reasonable. Theodoric was dead. Thorismund needed to prevent his brothers or rivals from taking power. But there may have been a deeper reason. Aetius may not have wanted the Visigoths to become too powerful. If Attila were destroyed completely, the Visigoths might emerge as the strongest military force in Gaul.
That could be dangerous for Rome.
A weakened Attila could still serve as a counterweight. A weakened Visigothic kingdom could still be managed. This was late Roman politics at its most calculating. Victory was not just about defeating the enemy in front of you. It was about preserving the balance of power after the battle ended. So Attila was allowed to withdraw. His invasion of Gaul had failed, but he was not destroyed. And that distinction matters, because 1 year later, Attila invaded Italy.
For centuries, the Battle of Châlons was remembered as one of the great turning points of history. Some called it the battle that saved Western civilization, the battle that stopped Attila, the battle that preserved Christian Europe. But modern historians are more cautious. Attila was checked in Gaul, yes. His campaign failed, yes. His prestige was damaged, yes. But he was not annihilated. In 452, he invaded Italy, devastating cities in the north before eventually withdrawing. And the Western Roman Empire did not recover. Within a generation, the last Western emperor would be deposed in 476. So Châlons did not save the Roman Empire. It did not end Hunnic power immediately. It was not the simple final victory that older histories sometimes imagined. But that does not mean it was unimportant. It mattered because it stopped Attila's Western campaign. It prevented Hunnic domination of Gaul. It preserved, for a little while longer, the fragile balance between Romans, Visigoths, Franks, Burgundians, and other powers. And it revealed the true nature of the 5th century West. Rome was still alive, but it could no longer stand alone.
The Battle of Châlons was not the last stand of Rome in the old heroic sense. It was something stranger, darker, and more revealing. A Roman general who had once lived among the Huns joined forces with a Gothic king whose people had once sacked Rome. Together, they fought Attila, a ruler whose army included not only Huns, but Goths, Gepids, Alans, and many others. This was not a battle between civilization and chaos. It was a battle between two worlds being built from the ruins of empire. Aetius won, but Rome remained weak. Theodoric died, but the Visigoths grew stronger. Attila escaped, but his aura of invincibility was broken.
The battlefield itself remains uncertain. The numbers remain uncertain. Even the meaning of the victory remains debated. But one thing is clear. In 451 CE, on the plains of Gaul, the old Roman world and the new barbarian kingdoms collided in one of the most dramatic battles of late antiquity. The Battle of Châlons did not save Rome, but it showed what Rome had become. An empire surviving through alliances, a world where enemies became partners, and where the future of Europe would no longer be decided by Rome alone. And from that dying world, medieval Europe would begin to rise.
If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and feel free to leave a comment. Thanks for watching.